Well, retirement realities, I should say. 3 generations of Americans currently in the workforce are concerned about their future nest eggs, but they're falling short in taking action to prepare. That's according to a new report from the Trans-American Center for Retirement Studies. The study finds 16% of baby boomers had less than $50,000 saved up for retirement, followed by 27% from Gen X and 37% of millennials. And the amount of Americans that had no retirement savings at all, well, that's about 9%, 10%, and 13%, respectively, for those 3 generations. So joining us now is John Scott, director of the Pew Charitable Trust's Retirement Saving Project. And John, I just want to get your reaction to those numbers. I mean, when we talk about generations kind of stalling and not prepping for retirement correctly, are you surprised to see that fall off?
No, I'm not surprised, actually. I think it's unfortunately a problem that spans generations. And, you know, I think we're sort of in a situation where Americans have to do more, but in many cases, they're not able to do more because of where they work, or they simply don't know where they should go first.
Yeah. In general, you know, you said that there's this divide and every generation is suffering from this, but when you hear that people feel generally like they're doing financially okay, but then you see these low savings for retirement, where do you think is, you know, the biggest divide here, and how can you bridge that gap in the mind of any generation to finally start saving?
Yeah, it's sort of tough because, you know, when you're thinking about different generations, there are different concerns and different things going on. So for the older generations, like the baby boomers or the Gen Xers, they've been in the workforce for a while. They're a little closer to retirement. And as we know, when you're a lot closer to an event, it's more on your mind. So, you know, they've been working and trying to save for retirement, but now they're starting to see how much they have saved, and they're getting a little bit more nervous and a little more concerned. There are some provisions in the law that allow them to save more when they hit their 50s. So, you know, they have an opportunity to save more in their retirement plans, but oftentimes this older age group, they have kids going to college, or, you know, maybe they have a parent who has healthcare needs and they have to try and care for that, so they're getting squeezed a little bit. You know, at the younger generations, you know, they have more time, and I think the millennials are a little more aware of this issue than maybe prior generations. You know, this is a generation that, you know, for the first time is going to be saving for retirement pretty much on their own, whereas maybe older generations had a traditional pension that the employer provided. So I think there's a growing awareness amongst the millennials that they have to do more. Unfortunately, for younger workers, it's a little more difficult to find jobs that offer a retirement plan. So they're getting squeezed in a different way. So I think in both cases, or across the generations, you have to be a little more proactive or entrepreneurial in seeking out opportunities to save more, or at least get into a retirement plan.
Mm-hmm.
And John, when it comes to that millennial population, how much of this do you think is about lack of education? So there may be awareness that they need to save more, but how much is the millennial audience really getting info about where to save? What are those vehicles? Who's targeting, who's reaching them, and who are they listening to?
Well, I think a lot of the education comes from employers themselves. You know, we have an employer sponsored system. Employer-provided retirement plans are the basic way that Americans save for retirement. And along with that comes a lot of education about you know, the need to save for retirement, as well as, you know, a huge incentive. Many employers offer a matching contribution that really, you know, if you don't participate in the plan, you're leaving money on the table. But, you know, and this is where it comes back to, if you're at a job that doesn't have a retirement plan, you know, where are you getting that education? So for a lot of folks, it's maybe a trusted source, maybe a family member, but that's, you know, as you can imagine, that's hit or miss. I do think there is a lot more chatter out there, you know, in the media and in other sources, you know, whether it's the need to save for retirement, or that we're living longer, or the precariousness of Social Security, you know, we're talking about the system being insolvent and benefits having to be cut. I think that, you know, from a variety of sources, it's starting to filter down But again, it's where do you go next? If you don't have a plan at your job, how do you set up an IRA, for example, or do some of these other things? It's a lot of work and a lot of information to gather if you're doing it by yourself.
All right, let me just put you on the spot here then, John, because I've got a lot of friends, perhaps myself included, in this bucket when we talk about that hard spot you're describing, where you've got student loans to pay off. You might not actually have the employee-sponsored program when we're talking about retirement. So if you're facing both those things, what's one easy thing you might be able to do? What's kind of the advice that you are giving to maybe that millennial generation who's saying, I'm really stuck in a hard spot here? What might you suggest?
Yeah, I think really the key is to start early. And even if it's a small amount, you've got a lot of time ahead of you. If you're in your 20s and 30s, and we're talking about lifespans going into their 80s and 90s now, potentially you're looking at 40 years. So even if you can start at 1, 2, 3% of your pay, and if your employer doesn't have a 401k plan at the workplace, if you can take that extra step and set up an IRA, and then have the employer deduct that 1 or 2 or 3%, out of your paycheck, so that you don't really notice it. You get that net pay. That contribution is going to your IRA, and it's accumulating over time, so you're getting in the habit of saving. That accumulates over time with the investment returns, and I think that's really the key first step. If you can sort of do that, and really any bank or investment manager or financial institution can help folks with that. You can go online and set up an IRA today.
Yeah.
There are a lot of things you can do. It's just really getting out there and doing that first thing, or asking your employer.
And pushing for it.
Do we have a retirement plan? Yeah, pushing for it. Be your own advocate. Again, as I said, be a little entrepreneurial with your own financial future.
All right, John Scott, thank you so much for breaking it down. No excuses out there for not getting started early. Appreciate you taking
No
the time.
excuses.